things. We can add new notes. We can load notes that we've previously written. They saved to our database. Haha. We can delete them. Deleted. We can create new notes. But you know what we can't do? Sign in and out. Right? We have no users. We have no authentication. We should fix that. We've seen that in Firebase, there's a whole section on authentication. That looks neat. But first things first. Let's not worry about how exactly the authentication is going to be implemented. Let's see how the sign-in, sign-out workflow is going to work within our app, regardless of what the back end is. So we have a whole separate view for the sign-in page, right? None of this stuff's going to be on the screen. And that should be what we see if we are not currently signed in. If we are currently signed in, we should see this. So what we see now is main, right? Sidebar, note list, note form, and all of their subcomponents are all inside main. If we're not signed in, we shouldn't see main at all. We should see a whole separate component. A sign-in component. Let's make a sign-in component. So in the source directory, capital S sign, capital IN .js. Well, let's make CSS too. Signin.css and capital S sign, capital IN .js. Sign-in is going to be a React component. It's going to be a stateless functional component because it doesn't need any state of its own. And it doesn't need any lifecycle methods. So we will import React from React. I'll make a variable called sign-in. That will be an arrow function. Before I forget, because I will forget, export default sign-in. And let's just return some very simple JSX. Oh, heck, I'll make it nice and big. I'm going to get rid of it anyway. About as simple as it gets. In an app, in my render method, I need to choose between the two. Right now, I'm rendering main. But I only want to do that if I'm signed in. Otherwise, I want to show the sign-in component instead. So in Dwarf Underground, there was an opportunity for you to conditionally show and hide different components. I don't know how many of you did that, but let's do it here. Everybody remember the ternary operator? Does anyone remember the ternary operator? When I say that? Yeah, what is that, John?
It's like a shorthand for setting a value based on the statement of value was true or false.
Yeah, it's a shorthand for if-else, where you have, don't copy this down. This is just an example. Your condition, question mark, what happens if it's true, colon, what happens if it's false. And inside JSX, that's a pretty nice way to do an if-else. So basically, if I'm signed in, do this. Otherwise, the sign-in component. If what, though? If I'm signed in. So let's just make a method. Signed in. I don't know how it's going to work yet. I'm not going to worry about it for the moment. I'm just going to have it return true all the time for now. But then I can say inside curly braces, because I'm going to put some JavaScript here. This dot signed in is my condition. Question mark. What happens if it's true? I render the main component, right? Colon, what happens if it's false? I render the sign-in component. If, yeah, that was just for readability. So if signed in, then main, else sign in. And right now, signed in is returning true all the time. So if I save, I expect this to be what it was before if I didn't screw up, which I did. Sign in is not defined, right? Why not? Didn't import it. Import sign in from sign in, not .css, JS. Oh, speaking of which, before I forget, let's import the CSS into sign in. Import ./signin.css. Okay. There we go. And everything looks the same. What if I change signed in to return false? Now I see the sign-in page, right? Just changing that thing determines which of those things I see. So that works. So what might I really do? Again, without knowing how the backend is going to work exactly, what could signed in do? Well, when we sign in, by whatever means, we'll probably get a user ID. So we could save that user ID to state. And then what signed in could do is just check whether that's there. So let's do something like that. So this .state, we put in notes, we put in current note. Let's also put in UID, and we'll just initialize that to null. We have no user ID yet. And what signed in will do is return this .state.uid. If it's null, that's effectively false. If it's an actual user ID, this will evaluate to true. So this should work. Right now, this .state.uid is null, so I'm signed out. I could use my React Dev Tools. Here's my app component. State, I see UID null. Because it's selected here, I have $R available in the console. So I could say $R.setState UID, whatever, dstruce. And suddenly I'm signed in. I can say $R.setState UID back to null. And I'm signed out. Cool. Let's make those things happen when we click buttons. So the sign in page should have a button on it, and when we click it, it should set the UID on app state. And the sign out button, which is in the sidebar, should set it back to null. So again, since UID is on apps state, it's the only component that's allowed to touch it, right? So let's make some new methods right above render. Going to have one called handle auth. I don't know exactly how authentication is going to work, but I'm going to have to handle some business when it happens. And what I want to do for right now is just this dot set state, set UID to anything really. I'll say dstruce. We're faking this. And I'll make a sign out method. And that we'll call this dot set state and set UID back to null. And since signed in just checks this dot state dot UID, that should do it. Checking it from the console again. As long as I have app as $R, now I should just be able to call $R dot handle auth, and I'm signed in. $R dot sign out, and I'm signed out. Now we need to make the buttons do what we want. So this signed in, or this handle auth method, I can just pass right down to the sign in component. Here it is. Sign in handle auth equals this dot handle auth. If we want to make this a tad more readable, we could do something like this. If we're signed in, do main. If we're not, do sign in. And we're passing handle auth as a prop down to sign in. So in sign in, we'll get a prop, we'll destructure it. It's called handle auth. And let's throw a button in here. Button, sign in. On click equals handle auth.
When you're auto-completing the button, are you just pressing tab after you type button?
I have a different keyboard shortcut set to that because tab auto-completes lots of different things, which may or may not be the right thing. Sometimes it isn't the right thing. On the website for the class, under VS Code under tools, there's like there's a key bindings thing. There's a key bindings page, and I talk about how I set that. On mine, it's Control Spacebar. It will be tab by default, but that won't always be what you want. So now clicking this button, we'll call handle auth. We saw handle auth does the thing. Oh yeah, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag, right? You can't return two things. So we'll need a div here, class name equals sign in. Click it. We're signed in. Now this is our sign out button. We need to make that work. So we already have the method, right? Sign out. And that needs to end up in the sidebar. That's where that button is. So That's in main. So in actions, we could add sign out. This dot sign out. In main, we just pass that down to the sidebar. Sign out equals props dot sign out. All right, we have our props here. And in the sidebar component, here we go. Here's the button inside this class name sign out. So I can throw on click equals, let's see. Now I'm breaking out my props here using destructuring. So in addition to reset current note, now I have sign out that I need. So on click sign out. Let's check it out. Here's my sign in component. I click sign in. Here's my main component. Click sign out. I'm back. And what's happening, if you watch the dev tools here, it's UID. That's the magic item. Sign in. I have a UID. Sign out. I don't. And which component we show just depends on the value of this.state.uid. Because that's how we wrote this signed in method, which is all we check to decide which one to show. Doesn't matter how we get the UID. For now, we're just hard coding it. This is the basic flow for signing in and signing out. Add authentication workflow. Even though we don't really have an authentication service just yet. Questions?
Can we go back to the button again?
Which one? Sign out or sign in?
The sign out one.
In the sidebar?
Yeah. Why is the class name FA sign out? Why is
This is the font awesome thing.
okay?
So class name of FA on an icon sets the font awesome font. FA sign out says which icon. So that's why the button looks like that. That's a font awesome icon.